Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Janmadhyasya yato anvayaditaratascha artheshu abhigyaswarat Tene Brahmahridaya adikavaye muhyanti yatsuraya Tejo vari mridam yatha vinimayo yatra trisargo mrisha Dhamna swena sada nirastakuhakam satyam param dhimahi Nikamakalpataror galitam phalam shukamukad amritadrava sanyutam pibata bhagavatam rasamalayam muhuraho rasika bhuvi bhavukaha. So we now enter the 11th chapter of the 9th Skandha of Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the continuation and conclusion of the story of Bhagavan Sri Ram. So we saw in the last chapter an extensive summary of the entire Ramayana given by Shuka Brahmarshi. He described all the pastimes. He referred to Valmiki as the authentic source from which one can read the whole Ramayana, which is given in great detail, with every pastime detailed with great beauty and poetry. And yet the events of the entire Ramayana is summarized by Shuka Brahmarshi in the last chapter, culminating with the wonderful ascension of Rama to the throne of Ayodhya and establishing Rama Rajya. In fact, he says, Tretayam Vartamanayam Kala Krita Samo Abhavat Rame Rajani Dharmagne Sarva Bhuta Sukhavahe. So he says in Rama Rajya, Sarva Bhuta Sukhavahe, everybody was happy because Dharma was established and it seemed like Satya Yuga, the perfect age where everyone was in harmony, everything was in harmony. So now Shuka Brahmarshi continues, after having ascended the throne, Ram ruled the kingdom perfectly and he conducted many yajnas propitiating Bhagavan Vishnu, who is none other than himself. So here it's nicely said, Bhagavan Atmana Atmanam Rama Uttama Kalpakaihi Sarvadeva Mayam Devam Ija Acharyavan Makhaihi. It says, guided by his Guru Vasishtha, the great Sri Ram, he propitiated his own self. Bhagavan Atmana Atmanam. He, by his own self, propitiated his own self because he is non-different from Bhagavan Vishnu, who is the embodiment of all sacrifices, and thereby he set the example for everyone. Even though there is no need for him to engage in sacrifices and austerities, he always set the example by doing what is necessary to be done as a king. And he gave wealth very generously to everyone, to his acharyas, to all the sages, the priests, and so on. So he gave wealth so generously that the Brahmanas there glorified, and they said, O Lord, what have you not given to us? You have given everything to us already, because you have entered our innermost heart and you have removed ignorance. What more can we need from you? So they are always generously gifted and they are full of gratitude because they first of all don't need any of this, and secondly, the highest benediction that Ram is giving is by entering the very heart of all beings as the light that removes darkness. So the Brahmanas beautifully say, Aprattam nastvaya kimnu bhagavan bhuvaneshwara yanno antar hridayam vishya tamo hamsi swarochisha. Swarochisha means by your own light. Tamo hamsi, you remove darkness, antar hridayam vishya, by entering the innermost recess of our heart. So this is the greatest wealth that we get from you every moment, that you are in our heart and you remove darkness. What can we do with all this external wealth? We don't even need this. And therefore they glorify by saying, Hail to Ram, who always takes care of all the sages, who is of excellent renown, whose wisdom is unparalleled, and whose holy feet are cherished by everyone who is valuing peace and dharma. They say, Namo Brahmanya Devaya Ramaya Akuntha Medhase Uttama Shloka Dhuryaya Nyasta Dandarpitangraye. So those who have renounced violence, those who are not interested in violence, they adore Bhagavan Sri Ram, who is of excellent renown and unparalleled wisdom. So this is how Rama Rajya continues most beautifully, setting the example for how a kingdom ought to be, how a king ought to be, how the government ought to be, taking care of the people, establishing dharma, but not interfering in their lives with everything, letting people engage in their professions, the four main professions of teaching, wisdom, of engaging in administration and army and so on, and engaging in business of various kinds, and then serving others. All of this was happening perfectly with the initiative of the people. The government, the kingdom, the ruler was not interfering in the affairs of the people. Everybody was made self reliant, that they could work, they could earn their money, they could live happily, and they would live without any greed, without any covetousness, without any fear. There was no fear of crime from within or without. Everybody was living in harmony, and because there was no exploitation, nature was in harmony as well. Rains were coming correctly, the seasons were changing correctly, everything was happening harmoniously in nature as well. People were also behaving harmoniously. There was overall prosperity and peace everywhere. So, this is the highest ideal of how a kingdom ought to be, Rama Rajya, where the government, the king, rules with love and compassion, giving total independence and self reliance to the citizens, not making them dependent on the kingdom, but at the same time not encouraging greed and exploitation, but striking the right balance where they can work hard and earn their living while not engaged in selfish greed and accumulation, but doing what is necessary and sharing everything of their own volition. So, this is the ideal of kingdom. And then there is the story of how Ram separates from Sita, which is well known. So, it is said that there were some in the kingdom who were unnecessarily casting aspersions on the fact that Ram was attached to Sita, and that is why he was keeping her even though she had spent a long time in the residence of Ravana. Of course, Mother Sita did not spend any time in the residence. She was only in the forest, Ashokavana, and she lived like a ascetic, completely rejecting any opulence of any kind, even basic food and other necessities, and she became so emaciated and she lived so beautifully in the purest way, even though she was offered all kinds of temptations by Ravana. And yet people are people, so some of them will always speak, and that is the nature of people. Even in Rama Rajya, when everybody lives in harmony, when everything is flowing beautifully, there is always going to be a few voices who are going to cast aspersions. And because Ram is the perfect king and he did not want his behavior to be the reason for people to cast aspersions, he took the hard decision of separating from Mother Sita, and Mother Sita was taken to the hermitage of the sage Valmiki, who, in fact, of course, wrote the entire Valmiki Ramayana. He also took care of Sita. Sita gave birth there to the sons Kusha and Lava. Says Kusho Lava iti khyatau tayos chakre kriya munihi. So the Muni, Valmiki, named them as Kusha and Lava and did all the purificatory rites for them. Meanwhile, Lakshmana, Bharata, and Shatrughna were helping the elder brother Ram in ably ruling the kingdom. Bharata conquered many territories. Shatrughna established what is called Mathura now. There was a place called Madhuvana, and this Madhuvana was a forest on the banks of Yamuna, which was established as a township, as a city by Shatrughna, which was called Madhura. And the Madhura became Mathura later when Krishna appears. And in fact, interestingly, in the south of Bharat, there is a city called Madurai, which is exactly the same name as Mathura, or Madhura, which was his original name, which is what is retained as Madurai. And thus we can see the cultural connection between the north and the south of Bharat, all having the same names, both being very ancient cities, the city of Madurai in the south too, as ancient. And so this was established by Shatrughna, and meanwhile Kusha and Lava were taking care of Valmiki, and they were serving the mother Sita. And after some time, it is said that Sita decided to end her earthly pastimes, so she entered earth. So Sita came from earth, it is said, and so she enters back into earth. And Ram hears of this, and he is, of course, full of grief, and he lives in the mood of separation from Sita for the rest of his earthly existence. So Ram, as we saw, he displays all moods as humans in the most perfect way, and the mode of separation which was exhibited by Ram even during the time when Ravana had kidnapped her and he was searching for her, those phases of Ramayana are the most moving, to see how Ram shows how he can exhibit his emotions while being this most powerful masculine embodiment, thus showing the true nature of a healthy masculine archetype, one who is not afraid to show his emotions, and yet one who is so valorous and takes care of everyone without any fear. So he set the example for everything in his earthly abode. That was the specific purpose of Ram appearing, other than, of course, killing Ravana and the demons. As already mentioned, every avatar, especially the avatars where Bhagavan spends a lot of time on earth, which is specifically Rama and Krishna, the main purpose of the avatar is to set example, is to inculcate devotion, is to give the holy name, and is to leave all the pastimes for people to contemplate. Because the establishment of dharma and the killing of demons is a very small thing, and it can be done even without descending on earth. The main purpose of descending, even though outwardly that is said to be the purpose of establishing dharma, the true inner purpose is to provide the form, the name, the pastimes, and the abode. It is called as Rupa, Nama, Leela, Dham. These four, Rupa means form, Nam means name, Leela is pastimes, Dham means the abode, the place of Ayodhya or Rameshwaram or various places where he set his lotus feet. So by providing these four, Rup, Nam, Leela, Dham, it enables everyone till today to connect with the energy of Ram and to be devoted and thereby purify themselves. That is the real purpose of avatar more than any external activities. So Ram did all this so beautifully and perfectly, and then after some time it is said that he left the earthly abode as well. But before that, he of course conquered all the quarters, and it is said that he would send his brothers in all directions to make sure all parts of the land was managed correctly, and he would himself go in the city regularly to be seen by people, and the roads would all be decorated every time Bhagavan comes in the city. The palaces were all beautifully decorated. Always there were lights, there were flags everywhere on the temples, on the palace tops. People would ascend to the rooftops every time Ram comes on the streets. There will be arches decorated constantly. There will be beautiful flowers and perfumes and all kinds of decoration. And everybody will be so happy to see him. They would all climb to the top of their respective mansions or windows and to get a beautiful darshan of Ram as he gloriously and splendorously marches through the streets of Ayodhya. And he would return to the palace, and the palace was so opulent as well. The whole land was opulent. Everybody there was living in opulence. There was jewels everywhere. People had all kinds of luxuries that was necessary to live a comfortable life. And in this way, all the wise men, they were able to revel in their own self. All the merchants were having the wealth that was necessary. All the warriors were having the protection and the ability to in turn protect others. And all those who served the society were serving with joy. So everybody was beautifully, harmoniously functioning in that society. And eventually, it is said that after a long time, Ram decided to go back to his heavenly or eternal abode of Vaikuntha, and he took along everyone who was there in that land of Kosala. So that is the specific benediction given to all the people. They were all there. The people who were there during the time of Ram were, of course, blessed to be there due to their past karma, and so they were all ready to be liberated, and they had to simply live there, behold Ram's darshan regularly, and they were all given liberation at the end of the earthly existence of Sri Ram. So it is said, therefore, that there is no wonder. So Shuka Brahmarshi concludes by saying, it is no wonder that Raghupati, who is Ram, did all these great things. He was able to launch all kinds of wondrous missiles. He was able to cross the ocean by building a bridge. He was able to kill all the demons. He was able to establish the most perfect kingdom. And he employed monkeys and bears in this process of fighting the demons. All of this may sound bewildering, but it is no wonder at all, because this is all done by the Supreme Being, for whom nothing is impossible. For him it is just a sport, it is a leela. And therefore to this great Raghupati I offer my obeisance. Shuka Brahmarshi says, Raghupatim Sharanam Prapadye. I surrender unto the lotus feet of Raghupati Sri Ram. And he says, because of the greatness of Ram, Kausalaste Yayusthanam Yatra Gachanti Yoginaha. Everybody in Kosala, the land of Ayodhya, they attain the abode that is which all the yogis aspire to. And so this is the greatness of the story of Ramayana and the whole pastime of Ramayana. So as we mentioned in the last episode, there is also great symbolism. So we see that even in our own lives, when some events happen, there is the external event, but there is also an inner symbolism if we read into it. So even more so in the case of the advent of Bhagavan, especially as Ram and Krishna, every single event has a beautiful inner symbolism. The symbolism and the historicity go together. People tend to separate the two and either emphasize on one or the other, but in fact both go together. The historicity has already been established in many ways. It is itihasa, as it is called. Itihasa literally means that which unfolded, and it has also been proven with satellite images and many such evidences even now. And yet, despite all the historical evidences, there are people who question this, and that is something that will always go on, because as we saw even during Rama Rajya, people questioned certain things, and therefore those who question also have the right to question, and they shall question. But there is enough evidence to demonstrate its historicity, and yet beyond the historicity there is also the symbolism. So quickly, the symbolism of Ramayana is very beautiful again from a spiritual journey's perspective. Ayodhya, the name itself represents a place without any conflict. Yuddha means conflict. Ayodhya means a place of no conflict. And Ram and Sita rule there. Ram is the supreme being, the Paramatma, and Sita is the Jiva, the one who is meant to be always with Ram, the supposed individual who is actually one with Ram. But what happens is, when Sita gets tempted by the golden deer, which is sent by Ravana, she gets separated. So Ravana, who has 10 heads, represents the 10 senses, the 5 senses of perception, sight, smell, taste, sound, and touch, and the 5 senses of action, which is speaking, holding, moving, reproducing, and excreting. So these are the 5 senses of action. So the 10 senses total are the 10 heads of Ravana, and he sends a golden deer which represents the temptation of the world, and the being, the Jiva, gets tempted by it, and therefore he separates from Paramatma. And when the intellect, which is meant to guide the Jiva, gives counsel, in that moment the Jiva ignores it. So the intellect is Lakshmana. Lakshmana gives counsel to not take this bait, to not leave this place. He says, I shall be here and protect you. But Sita makes Lakshmana go away in that very moment, which symbolizes how in the moment of temptation, the jiva lets go of the intellect is ignored, and because of that the jiva is kidnapped by Ravana, which is to say the jiva falls in the trap of Maya, and she is taken to Lanka, and Lanka represents Maya because the place is so opulent. It is literally called Ashokavana. Ashokavana means a place of no outer sadness, and yet it is filled with inner sadness because there is all the wealth around, all kinds of temptations around, and yet there is no true inner happiness. And so when that happens, Sita realizes her folly and pines for Rama, which is the sadhaka pining for attaining again the Supreme. He has left the Supreme because of temptation due to the 10 senses putting out the temptation, and by ignoring the intellect, he has fallen into Maya, and now he is pining to go back and be one with the Supreme Being Paramatma. And the messenger who makes this happen is Hanuman. Hanuman represents the mind that is surrendered. Hanuman is Vayu Putra. Vayu means air or wind, and it is always said that mind and air go together. Prana and mind are two forms of the same energy. Breath and thought are always linked, and the mind is a monkey because it always is jumping from one thought to another. But when the same mind, which is linked to breath, is completely surrendered and therefore it is fully regulated, the mind, which is normally a monkey, which is distracted all the time, suddenly gets tremendous power that nothing is impossible. So that is the representation of Hanuman. Hanuman represents the mind which is completely surrendered to Paramatma, to Ram, and therefore free of any distraction, and therefore with tremendous power that it can make anything happen. And with this great potency, Hanuman is able to go to Lanka and be the messenger to bring the message of Ram, which is the purpose of the surrendered mind. The mind, when it is surrendered, it is the greatest aid for the sadhaka. And with this help, Ram is now able to bridge the ocean, that is, come into the land of Maya, which is to bestow his grace where we are. The Paramatma, by his grace, so the duty of the sadhaka is to pine for union, but the sadhaka cannot go. The grace has to descend to take him. So the sadhaka has to be where he is, but Ram had to cross the ocean to go to Lanka and protect and retrieve Sita, which is the symbolism that grace comes once the surrendered mind, which is Hanuman, is accepted. In other words, when the mind completely surrenders to Paramatma, then grace descends. So first Hanuman comes, then Ram comes to Lanka, and when Ram comes, he defeats Ravana, which is the 10-headed, and therefore the 10 senses which are constantly distracting, it is destroyed. And Ravana has two brothers as well, Vibhishana and Kumbhakarna, who three of them represent the three gunas of Maya. So Lanka is Maya, which is made of three gunas. Ravana is the Rajo guna, the passion. Kumbhakarna is the Tamo guna, which is ignorance. And Vibhishana is the Sattva guna, who is goodness. So therefore he is the one good brother, whereas the other two are in ignorance and passion. And therefore they fight Ram, while Sattva guna, Vibhishana, surrenders to Ram. In fact, Vibhishana Sharanagati is a very famous episode in Ramayana. It symbolizes how Vibhishana comes to Ram to surrender. Everybody doubts Vibhishana because he is the brother of Ravana, but Ram immediately says, anybody who surrenders to me, I accept them completely. Even if they say once that I surrender to you, then I accept them completely. It's a beautiful verse in Valmiki Ramayana. Ram declares beautifully that even once if anybody says, I am yours, I shall give them fearlessness. This is my vow. He says, Sakrudeva prapannaya tavasmi iti yachate abhayam sarvabhutebhyo dadami etat vratam mama. So he says, this is my vrata, my vow, that anyone who surrenders unto me, he shall be given complete protection and fearlessness no matter what. So he extends his protection and his refuge to Vibhishana, which is the famous Vibhishana Sharanagati. So again, the symbolism is Vibhishana is the Sattva Guna, the goodness which recognizes the higher principle and surrenders, whereas the other two, Rajoguna and Tamoguna, Ravana and Kumbhakarna resist and they are killed. And the Sattva Guna, because it surrendered, it's now made the king of Lanka. So that is the way to live in this world, is to be established in Sattva Guna so that it doesn't create any disturbance while being fully surrendered to the Supreme Being Paramatma. And meanwhile, Sita is reunited and she goes back to Ayodhya and they ascend the throne, which is the re-establishment of the sadhaka back in his eternal home, one with the Supreme Being, the land of no conflict, Ayodhya. So this is the glorious symbolism of Ramayana, and therefore listening to the story of Ramayana alone, and especially knowing the symbolism of it, is a complete journey of one's spiritual life. And simply to listen to this, therefore, is said to bestow all kinds of benedictions. And that is why Shuka Brahmarshi concludes beautifully by saying, the one who treasures this narrative of Sri Rama through the repeated process of hearing and is free of any violence in his mind, he is completely liberated from all karma and given the eternal abode. He says, Purusho Ramacharitam Shravanair Upadharayan Anrishamsya Paro Rajan Karma Bandhair Vimuchyate. He says, the one who listens to this beautiful story of Ramayana with reverence and love and peace in his heart, he is liberated and situated in the eternal abode. So, just visualizing Ram and Sita ascending the throne of Ayodhya is a glorious vision, because that vision symbolizes realizing the eternal abode of Bhagavan here and now. So with this glorious account of Ram being narrated by Shuka Brahmarshi, having listened to it, this chapter ends. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.